I thought my husband was a gentle data analyst until a remote mountain evening revealed the lethal stranger I'd married. The mountain air was supposed to taste like freedom. That's what my husband, Mark, had promised me. For our 5th anniversary, he'd planned this whole trip. A week of unplugging from our chaotic city lives. Just the two of us. A rented cabin. And the vast, silent embrace of the national park. Mark was the quiet type. A data analyst who found more beauty in spreadsheets and code than most people find in a symphony. He was gentle, kind, and the most predictable man I knew. His idea of a wild Friday night was ordering from a new pizza place. I loved that about him. He was my rock, my calm in the storm of my own life. We'd spent the day hiking to a spot he'd found online, a scenic overlook called Eagle's Peak. The view was breathtaking. A sea of green and gold treetops stretched out below us, bathed in the warm, honey-like glow of the setting sun. Mark was in his element, fussing with his camera, adjusting the tripod, a contented smile on his face. He looked so at peace, so normal. I leaned against our rented SUV, sipping a thermos of hot chocolate he'd packed, feeling a wave of pure, unadulterated happiness wash over me. This was perfect. The sound started as a distant, angry buzz, like a trapped wasp. It grew louder, a grating metallic roar that tore through the tranquility of the evening. I frowned looking down the winding mountain road. A beat-up dark green sedan, missing a hubcap and trailing a plume of black smoke, careened around the final bend and screeched to a halt in the small gravel lot, blocking us in. The music blaring from its open windows was violent and loud, a stark contrast to the birdsong that had filled the air moments before. My heart gave a little nervous flutter. 4 men piled out of the car. They weren't hikers. They were dressed in baggy jeans and stained hoodies, their posture radiating a kind of lazy, predatory arrogance. The one who seemed to be the leader, a tall, wiry guy with a cheap-looking tattoo snaking up his neck, grinned at us. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was the kind of smile that made the hair on your arms stand up. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet air. "Look what we've got here. A private showing of the sunset." His friends chuckled, a low, menacing sound. They fanned out, creating a loose semicircle around us. Mark hadn't moved. He was still standing by his tripod, his back partially to them, looking through the camera's viewfinder. "Mark," I whispered, my voice tight. "Mark, let's go." He lowered the camera slowly and turned. He gave them a small, polite nod. "Evening," he said, his voice perfectly level. "The view is pretty incredible, isn't it?" I wanted to scream. Why was he being so nonchalant? Couldn't he feel the danger crackling in the air? This wasn't the time for pleasantries. The leader, let's call him Smirk, sauntered closer. He eyed my purse, then Mark's expensive-looking camera. "Incredible," he repeated, mocking Mark's tone. "But I bet you guys have something even more incredible for us. A little donation for preserving the local, scenery." His cronies laughed again. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the moment from the nightmares everyone has. Stranded, isolated, with no one to help. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes. Do something. Say something. But he just stood there, his expression unreadable, calm. Too calm. It wasn't the calm of a man in control. It was the calm of a man who had frozen, a deer in the headlights. My heart sank. My gentle, predictable Mark was terrified. "Look," Mark said, his voice still steady. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "We don't want any trouble. You can have the cash in my wallet. Just take it and let us go." Smirk's grin widened. "Oh, we'll get to the wallet, and the pretty lady's purse, and that shiny camera." He took another step, invading our personal space. "But first, we're gonna have a little fun. You two look like you could use some excitement in your lives." One of his friends, a brutish guy with a shaved head, reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. A jolt of pure terror shot through me, and I let out a small, involuntary cry. "Get off me!" That's when it happened. Everything seemed to slow down. Mark had been standing perfectly still, his hands still raised. But as the man's fingers dug into my bicep, something in Mark shifted. It wasn't a big movement. It was a subtle change in his posture, a flicker in his eyes that went from placid to something ancient and cold. "Let her go," Mark said. His voice was different now. The polite, slightly nervous tone was gone. This voice was flat, devoid of emotion, and carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Smirk just laughed. "Or what, buddy? You gonna take a strongly worded photo of me?" The man holding me tightened his grip, pulling me forward. And in that instant Mark moved. It wasn't a panicked lunge or a clumsy swing. It was a blur of motion, economical and impossibly fast. He closed the 3 feet between them in a heartbeat. His left hand shot out and clamped around the man's wrist. His right hand came up, not in a fist, but with his fingers straight and rigid. He didn't hit the man's face. He struck him once, a sharp, precise jab, right in the throat. There was a horrible, wet, gurgling sound. The man's eyes bulged in shock and pain. His grip on my arm vanished as his hands flew to his own neck, desperately trying to draw a breath he couldn't find. He stumbled backwards, collapsing to his knees, his face turning a sickening shade of purple. The whole clearing went dead silent, the blaring music, the smug laughter, the wind in the trees. It all disappeared. There was only the sound of a man choking on the ground and the sudden, terrifying realization that filled the space between us. The 3 other men stared, their jaws hanging open, their bravado completely shattered. They looked from their fallen friend to Mark, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in their eyes. They weren't looking at a data analyst anymore. They were looking at a monster. Mark slowly straightened up, turning his head to face the leader. The setting sun cast his face in shadow, but I could see the cold, unblinking focus in his eyes. He hadn't broken a sweat. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He simply looked at the gang leader, the same way a wolf might look at a rabbit, and he spoke one sentence, a quiet promise of violence that chilled me to the bone. "You wanted excitement," he said, his voice a low, deadly whisper. "Congratulations. You found it." For a long moment nobody moved. The only sounds were the ragged, desperate gasps of the man on the ground and the thumping bass still pulsing from the open car doors. Smirk, the leader, stared at Mark, his mocking grin gone, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. His eyes flickered to his friend, writhing in the gravel, then back to my husband. The air was thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't just the threat of a mugging anymore. It was the primal fear of a predator who has just realized it picked a fight with something much, much higher on the food chain. I was frozen in place, my hand still outstretched from where the man had grabbed me. I was looking at Mark, but I didn't recognize him. His posture, his gaze, the set of his jaw, it was all alien. My gentle, predictable Mark, the man who once spent 10 minutes trying to safely catch a moth to release it outside, had just disabled a human being with the casual, brutal efficiency of a machine. My mind was screaming, trying to reconcile the 2 images, but they wouldn't fit. It was like watching a lamb turn into a wolf. Smirk finally broke the spell. He took a shaky step back, his eyes wide. "What the hell are you?" he stammered. He reached behind his back, and his hand reappeared, holding a cheap switchblade. The blade snapped open with a pathetic click that was utterly dwarfed by the enormity of the silence. "You don't want to do that," Mark said, his voice still unnervingly calm. He took a half step forward, placing himself more squarely between me and them. That little bit of movement seemed to break the paralysis of the other 2 thugs. The bigger one, a heavy-set guy with a greasy ponytail, let out a roar of rage and charged. He ran like a bull, head down, arms wide, aiming to simply overwhelm Mark with sheer size. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound. Mark didn't retreat. He didn't even seem to brace himself. As the man was almost on top of him, Mark sidestepped, a fluid, economical motion. He stuck out his leg. It wasn't a kick. It was a perfectly placed obstacle. The charging man tripped, his momentum carrying him forward. He went down hard, face first into the gravel. But Mark wasn't done. Before the man could even register the fall, Mark was on him. He dropped a knee onto the man's back, and I saw him grab the man's left arm, twisting it at an angle that was fundamentally wrong. There was a sickening, wet pop that echoed in the mountain air, followed by a scream of agony so pure it turned my stomach. The fight was over for him, just like that. 2 down. 10 seconds. Now it was just Smirk with his knife and the last guy, who looked like a terrified teenager. Smirk brandished the knife, his hand trembling. "I'll cut you, man. I'll gut you." His voice was high-pitched, laced with panic. Mark slowly rose to his feet, turning to face him. He didn't even look at the man screaming on the ground. He just disregarded him, as if he were a piece of discarded trash. "You have a choice," Mark said to Smirk, taking another deliberate step forward. "You can put the knife down, get in your car, and take your friends to a hospital. Or you can find out what happens next." It was a chance, a lifeline. A sane person would have taken it, but Smirk was high on some cocktail of pride and terror. He lunged, swiping wildly with the blade. I watched in horror, my heart seizing in my chest. But what was a wild, clumsy attack to me was something else entirely to Mark. He moved with a grace that was terrifying. He flowed around the blade, his hand darting out to catch Smirk's wrist. He twisted. The knife clattered to the ground. In the same motion, Mark's other hand came up and he drove the heel of his palm into the side of Smirk's head. The leader's eyes rolled back and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, landing in an unconscious heap next to his car. 3 down. The last man, the skinny teenager, let out a whimper of pure terror. He scrambled backwards, his eyes darting between his 3 incapacitated friends and the silent, deadly figure of my husband. He turned and bolted for the driver's side door of their car. He was going to run. He was going to leave them. "Don't," Mark commanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. The kid ignored him, fumbling with the handle. Mark took 2 quick steps, bent down, and his hand came up with the switchblade he'd just taken from Smirk. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it. It wasn't a wild toss. It spun through the air with a faint whirring sound and embedded itself, thunk, deep into the rubber of the car's front tire. The tire hissed violently, sagging instantly onto its rim. The kid froze, his hand on the door, staring at the knife sticking out of his tire. He slowly turned, his face as white as a sheet. He raised his hands in surrender, shaking uncontrollably. The fight was over. The entire, brutal, terrifying ballet of violence had lasted less than 30 seconds. Mark stood in the middle of the gravel lot, surrounded by the wreckage of 4 men's arrogance. He took a deep, steadying breath. The first sign of exertion I'd seen from him. Then he turned to me. The cold, hard mask was gone, but the man who looked at me now was still a stranger. His eyes, usually so warm and full of mild amusement at the world, were clear and sharp, scanning me from head to toe. Not with the loving gaze of a husband, but with the detached clinical assessment of a field medic. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Report. Any pain? Dizziness? Check your arms, your torso." "Mark, what? Who?" I couldn't form a sentence. My world had been tilted on its axis and was still spinning. He walked over to me, his movements still precise. He gently took my arm, the one the first man had grabbed, his fingers probing the muscle with an expert touch. "There's going to be bruising. We'll ice it when we get back to the cabin." He wasn't comforting me. He was diagnosing me. He released my arm and pulled out his phone. I thought he was calling 911, that this nightmare was about to be handed over to the authorities, but he didn't dial 911. He scrolled to a single contact, a name I'd never seen before, just a string of letters and numbers. He hit the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. When someone answered, Mark didn't say hello. He spoke a single, cryptic phrase, his voice as calm and professional as if he were ordering a pizza. "This is Nomad. I have a broken arrow situation at these coordinates. Package is secure, but we have 4 tangos needing sanitation." My brain struggled to process the words. Nomad. Broken arrow. Package is secure. Tangos needing sanitation. It was a foreign language, a coded message from a life I knew nothing about. Tangos? I knew that term from movies. It meant targets, enemies. He was talking about the men bleeding and moaning on the ground around us. Sanitation. A.T. The word sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. And package is secure. He was looking right at me when he said it. I was the package. He listened for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon, never resting in one place. Understood, he said into the phone, and then hung up. He tucked the phone back into his pocket and turned his full attention back to me. The stranger was gone. It was Mark again, my Mark, his eyes softening, the hard lines of his face relaxing. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my face. "Okay," he said, his voice now laced with the familiar warmth I knew. "It's okay now, Sarah. It's over." "Over," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Mark, what was that? Who was that on the phone? What are tangos?" I gestured wildly at the scene around us. The man with the throat injury was still making horrible choking sounds. The one with the dislocated arm was sobbing in pain. Smirk was still unconscious. You took them apart, like they were nothing. You're a data analyst." He let out a long sigh, the sound heavy with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. He ran a hand over his face. "We need to go. We have about 20 minutes. 20 minutes until what?" I demanded, my fear starting to curdle into a bewildered anger. "The police! Are the police coming?" Mark shook his head. "No, not the police." He walked over to the man with the throat injury, knelt beside him, and with a series of quick, precise movements shifted the man's position, clearing his airway enough that the horrifying gurgling subsided into a pained but steady breathing. He did it with the same detached efficiency he'd used to injure him in the first place. He then went to the man with the dislocated arm. "This is going to hurt," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Before the man could protest, Mark grabbed his arm and shoulder, and with one swift, brutal motion slammed the joint back into its socket. The man's scream was cut short as he fainted from the shock. I watched, horrified and mesmerized. My husband, the man who couldn't stomach scary movies, was performing battlefield first aid on the men he had just dismantled. He moved to the unconscious leader, checked his pulse, and rolled him into the recovery position. Finally, he looked at the terrified teenager, who was still standing by the car with his hands up. "Get them in the car," Mark ordered. "All of them." The kids stared, paralyzed with fear. "Now," Mark's voice cracked like a whip. The kids scrambled to obey, trying to haul his unconscious leader into the back seat of the decrepit sedan. "Mark, you have to talk to me," I pleaded, following him as he walked back towards our SUV. "What is going on? Who are you?" He stopped and finally looked at me, really looked at me. I could see a universe of conflict in his eyes. "Sarah, I can't explain everything right now. There isn't time. Just know that I love you, and I would never ever let anything happen to you. I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" How could I? The man I had married, the man I thought I knew inside and out, was a complete stranger. A dangerously competent, ruthlessly violent stranger. But looking into his eyes, beneath the hardened exterior I'd just witnessed, I saw a flicker of the man I loved, a desperate plea for me to believe in him. I nodded numbly, unable to speak. "Good," he said, giving my shoulder a firm squeeze. "Get in the car. We'll leave everything else." His camera, the expensive tripod, our hiking gear, he didn't even glance at it. His only priority was getting us away from there. I got into the passenger seat of our SUV, my body moving on autopilot. Mark started the engine. The kid had managed to load 2 of his friends into the car and was struggling with the third. Mark didn't wait. He put the SUV in reverse, maneuvered around their disabled vehicle, and started driving down the mountain road, away from the carnage, away from the sunset. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the crunch of tires on gravel. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Was he in the mob? A secret agent? Had he been lying to me for our entire relationship? Every gentle touch, every quiet evening, every predictable, wonderful thing about him was now cast in a sinister new light. "The data analyst job," I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Is any of it real?" He kept his eyes on the road. "It is now," he said quietly. "It has been for the last 6 years. Before that, before I met you, I had a different job." "What kind of job?" He was silent for a long moment. The kind of job where you learn how to make sure you and the people you care about come home. It wasn't an answer, but it was all I was going to get. As we rounded a bend, the overlook disappeared from view. A few miles down the road, Mark suddenly pulled over onto a small dirt turnout, killing the engine and the headlights. The sudden plunge into darkness and silence was jarring. "What are we doing?" I asked, my heart starting to pound again. "We wait," he said. He was staring intently at the rearview mirror, his body coiled and tense. I followed his gaze, looking back up the dark, winding road we'd just come down. For a minute there was nothing but blackness and the silhouettes of the trees against the starry sky. Then I saw them. 2 pinpricks of light, far up the mountain, near where we'd been. They weren't car headlights. They were moving too fast, descending the mountain at an impossible speed. They grew larger, resolving into 2 powerful searchlights mounted on something big and dark and quiet. I heard it before I saw it clearly, a low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that vibrated through the floor of the car. 2 sleek, black helicopters, flying without any running lights except for their search beams, swooped down towards the Eagles Peak overlook. They moved with a predatory grace, their beams crisscrossing over the gravel lot we had just fled. They weren't police. They weren't medevac. This was something else entirely. This was military. "Mark," I breathed, my hand gripping his arm. "Who are they?" He didn't answer. He just watched as one of the helicopters landed silently, its searchlight illuminating the thug's car. Figures in dark tactical gear rappelled down from the second hovering chopper. They moved with the same impossible speed and efficiency that Mark had. It was a professional sanitation crew. His crew. "They'll take care of it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They'll scrub the site, pick up the trash, and make sure no one ever remembers we were there." He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road, driving away without his headlights on, navigating the dark mountain pass with an ease that spoke of long practice. He was leaving his past behind again, trying to bury the man he used to be. But I had seen him, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that you can't bury something that's still alive. We drove the rest of the way down the mountain in a thick, suffocating silence. I kept stealing glances at him. The man behind the wheel looked like my husband. He held the steering wheel the same way, his knuckles white when he was tense. He had the same small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood cycling accident. But his eyes, they kept flicking to the mirrors, scanning the darkness behind us, not out of habit, but out of a deep, ingrained instinct I had never seen before. Every shadow we passed seemed to hold a potential threat he was ready to meet. We reached the cabin, and the illusion of our perfect anniversary trip was shattered. The cozy little rental now felt like a cage, a flimsy wooden box in a world that had suddenly revealed its teeth. Mark went through the cabin first, a quick, silent sweep of the rooms that was so methodical it was terrifying. Only when he was satisfied it was secure did he turn to face me. I stood in the middle of the living room, my arms wrapped around myself. "I deserve an explanation, Mark, not a partial one. All of it." He nodded, his face etched with a profound sadness. "You do," he said, his voice quiet. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, looking less like a lethal weapon and more like a man facing a final judgment. "My name isn't the only thing that's real, Sarah. My love for you is real. The life we've built is real. It's the most real thing I've ever had." He took a breath. "Before I was a data analyst, before I was Mark, I was someone else. I was a call sign, nomad. I was part of a specialized unit, a very small, very quiet team that didn't officially exist. We were sent to places that weren't on any map, to solve problems the government couldn't publicly acknowledge." My mind reeled. Special forces. It wasn't just a job. It was a whole other identity. So all of it, the clumsiness, the fear of scary movies, the quiet life, was it all an act? "No," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "God, no. That was the goal. When I got out, I wanted that more than anything. I was tired, Sarah. So tired of the violence, of looking over my shoulder, of being a ghost. I wanted to be a normal person. I met you, and you were like the sun. You were bright and real, and you talked about the future like it was a promise, not just a possibility. Being with you, being your predictable, boring Mark. It was like learning how to breathe again. It wasn't an act. It was my salvation. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had moved with such devastating precision just an hour ago. What you saw up there? That was the ghost. It's a part of me I have tried to bury for 6 years. I never wanted you to see it. I'm so sorry you had to. I sank down into the armchair opposite him, the pieces of my life rearranging themselves into a new, terrifying, and strangely coherent picture. The way he could navigate any city without a map. The way he always knew where the exits were in a crowded theater. The preternatural calm he had during a citywide power outage. All the little quirks I'd found endearing were scars from a former life. And those men, I asked, my voice soft. What happens to them? That sanitation crew. They're not assassins, if that's what you're thinking, he clarified quickly. It's a cleanup team. They rendered medical aid. Right now, those 4 men are being processed. Their car will be found abandoned. They'll be delivered to the nearest state police barracks with a story that will stick. A story about 4 known felons who tried to rob a tourist, got into a fight amongst themselves, and were found by an anonymous hiker who called it in. The evidence will be perfect. The charges will be aggravated assault, illegal possession of a weapon, kidnapping. They'll go to jail for a very, very long time. The official record will have no mention of us. By tomorrow morning, it will be like we were never there. Instantly jailed. The promise of the title clicked into place. It wasn't magic, it was a terrifyingly efficient machine that he had once been a part of. A machine he could still call upon. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a space for me to think, to feel. I looked at the man on the sofa. He wasn't the simple man I had married. He was infinitely more complex, more dangerous, and more broken than I had ever imagined. He had lied to me, not with his words, but with a profound omission that defined his entire being. But he had also done it to protect me, to protect the peaceful life he craved. He hadn't become a monster to save me. He had revealed the monster he'd once been, and hated every second of it. I stood up and walked over to him. He watched me, his eyes full of fear, not of a threat in the shadows, but of my rejection. I sat down next to him, and after a long moment, I took his hand. It was steady, warm, and familiar. It was the hand that had held mine on our first date, the hand that had slipped a ring on my finger, the hand that I held every night before I fell asleep. I married Mark, the data analyst, I said, my voice finally steady. And I love him. I don't know this. Nomad. He scares me. But the man who saved my life on that mountain, who was willing to do anything to protect me. I think I love him too. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He squeezed my hand, a desperate, grateful pressure. The trip was ruined. Our blissful ignorance was gone forever. But as I sat there, holding my husband's hand, my quiet, gentle, loving, and lethally dangerous husband, I realized something. The mountain air was supposed to taste like freedom. And in a strange way, it did. It was the freedom that comes from seeing the whole truth, the good and the terrifying, and choosing to love it all, completely, and without reservation. Our life would never be simple again, but it would be real, and we would face it together.